Since 2021, over 52,000 unaccompanied children have crossed our southern border, our Texas southern border. When these children come across, they're taken into the care of HHS, a federal government agency which stands for Health and Human Services, and they in turn place these children in facilities or with sponsors. A lot of times these facilities are non-government organizations that are taking taxpayer dollars to run these facilities. The problem is local governments are not informed of these facilities. With that said, we have no idea how many children are in these facilities. We have no idea who's running these facilities, and we have no idea the type of care, if any, these children are receiving. These children are exposed to violent crime. These children are exposed to slave labor, and these children are exposed to sex trafficking. This is happening right here in our nation, right here in our state, and possibly in our own backyard. To talk with me today about these issues, we have Sheena Rodriguez, president of Alliance for a Safe Texas. Stay tuned. Howdy. My name is Melody Allen. I'm a follower of Christ, native Texan, a wife, Texas Aggie, Bible study leader, Christian conservative political activist, and the host of the Patriots Revival podcast. Here on Patriots Revival, we share the good news of Christ and discuss the current political climate in relationship to truth and God's Word. In doing so, we hope to educate, inspire, and encourage Christian conservatives to make a radical return to God's Word as it relates to politics and every aspect of life. And we hope to get folks involved to help restore God to government. We've got dust on the Bible, so we need a revival, a Patriots Revival. Sheena, welcome back to Waxahachie. I know you've been here before back in, was that 2022?
I think so. Feels like forever ago.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. When we were here for our county commissioner's court, when several citizens, we were trying to convince our county commissioners to declare an invasion or call upon Governor Abbott to declare an invasion in our southern border. So had a chance to meet you back then. So welcome back to Waxahachie.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back here. This is a really cool little town. Not too far from me. So it's great to
That's
be
good.
here.
Yeah, kind of a short drive
Yeah.
for you a little bit. So
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and Alliance for a Safe Texas.
Yeah. So I had actually been doing this for about since 2021, early 2021, specifically with regards to the border and border related issues. Prior to that, I really got newly involved in politics in general. I'm a huge pro-life advocate. That's where my heart is. For several years when my kids were younger, I was a volunteer counselor at a local pregnancy center over there in DFW. I guess this is still technically DFW.
It is.
Up in my area of DFW in North Texas, in Irving is actually where our location was. But and marched in Dallas, for that. So I was always involved in advocacy for what I felt led to and very passionate about, but never really involved in politics. At the time, I watched Bill O'Reilly and Hannity and Combs when that was a thing.
Yep.
And I thought that was enough. I thought I was educated enough. And then really, like so many over the last few years, like really woke up, especially under the Trump administration. And I'm like, you know what? I really don't know who I'm even voting for anymore, or if they even actually align with my values. I don't know the process of I didn't even know what the primaries were.
Oh, wow.
I had never voted. I've always voted Republican my entire life, but I didn't even know. Like, that's how ignorant I was. That I say that, but that's the vast majority of Americans, right?
Indeed.
And so when I actually started getting involved in politics, I began going down there to the state capitol, learning the process and advocating for all things conservative. And then really felt led to go down to the border because I wasn't trusting the things that the media was saying, and started going down there and seeing for myself what was happening. And then I'm like, I'm seeing what's happening here. Now, what do I do about it? Because you feel so hopeless, especially with regards to the border related issues. We're so ingrained to believe that this is a federal issue, when us as Texans who are at the forefront of it are the ones who have to deal with the negative consequences, right? And so then I'm like, what can we do? It's not, I'm a homeschooling mom, right? So it's like, it's not enough to just know that this is an issue.
Yeah.
What can I do about it? So that's really where I set off to do, was to try to advocate and educate for everything that we can do on the city, county, and state level. I had 3 different bills that were proposed this last session with regards to really the unaccompanied minors and interior enforcement. Advocated for, gosh, the last 2 sessions and the never-ending special sessions in between from last session and this one. We're gearing up for the interim charges now once again. So, but really learning the process and then educating, like, that this is what people can do and how they can get involved and how it's impacting them directly. So that's how Alliance for a Safe Texas was born, if you will, back in late 2022. And right now we're hoping to also become a 501c4, but now we're also hoping to very soon be applying for a C3. And then so we can continue doing this.
Okay. So talk a little bit about the border and the problems that you see, because you said you went and saw all of this for yourself. And so what were the top things that you would say really clicked for you that, okay, we've got to do something about this? Was it unaccompanied minors? Was it other issues about crime, fentanyl, sex trafficking? What, all of the above? Maybe talk a little bit about those main points of what's wrong with us having an open border, and how all of this, what are the ones that are you're most passionate about, I should say.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there because it's gosh, I mean, there's so many different angles to go at this, but really, I'll go back to the first time that I had, okay, we live in the North Texas area, right? And it's funny because Texas is almost big enough to be its own country, right? And I say that because even though I was born here in Texas, came back and graduated here in North Texas in 2002 is when I graduated, but came back in late 1999. I had never been further south than San Antonio. Okay. And it's not that crazy to think that when you think of the geographics, right? Like, why would I, right? When I first went down to the border, like the physical border along the banks of the Rio Grande, was actually in early March of 2021. Went down there to Laredo with a group of individuals. I was just tagging along. And I remember at the time my husband was telling me, this is just like a one-time deal thing. You have to understand, my husband is also a first-generation Mexican-American, right? He's gone to Mexico several times. He has family that live there right along the border. He's been trying to get me to go to Mexico for years. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen, right? So like, I say that because when you really kind of think about the grand scale, like none of what I'm doing makes sense.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Right.
So anyways, all that to say, the first time that I went down to Laredo and my husband was like, this is just like a one-time deal thing. And I was like, totally. Right. Like, who in their right mind would want, I was going down to meet with local pastors too. Why would I do this? Like, I don't know why I'm feeling called to go. I'm just going to go.
Yeah.
And so many things were going through my head. But when I first got down there, everything that could go wrong went wrong. Flat tires. I mean, horrible traffic, right? You name it. When we first got there, we were meeting at the pastor at a park and some locals there at a park. It's right along the banks of the Rio Grande. And as soon as I step out of the car, I see a pod, what I call like a pod of men to this one Border Patrol agent. This is right there. Like, there's a shopping center across the street.
Wow.
And this is right after the administration first took over. And this one Border Patrol agent, I kid you not, I wish I was joking, turns around, looks at me, doesn't know me from anywhere, and says, I need help. We're being invaded. And I stood there for 2 nights, me and a friend of mine at the time, just simply helping the singular Border Patrol agent, trying to shine the light to help this one Border Patrol agent.
So let me make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're going down there with a group of people. You're seeing a Border Patrol agent on the street with a group of men, a pod of men, and they're asking you, a regular citizen, for help in managing these people that are coming across. And this was 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Early 2021. Yeah.
Wow.
It's crazy, right? So, and during those 2 nights that I was going out there with the friends, just simply aiding with just flashing the flashlights, because there were pods of men, including a pod of men from China who were stripped naked, crossing the river, holding their clothes. I did not encounter not one single child, not one woman. I didn't witness any of that. And I'm just standing there at the public park. So I'm just standing there with the flashlight helping, and I'm astonished. And I started from that first night, I had tears rolling down my face, because what I saw, I was angry.
Mhm.
And what I saw was my children's future going down the drain. When
Wow.
you're looking at, and I saw and I witnessed, I have all this on camera, where the individuals crossing and helping them cross in the river in Laredo were mocking the Border Patrol agent.
Mm.
I mean, laughing and mocking. Oh, if we'll we'll get back here just later on. Ha! I mean, it was astonishing.
Mm.
And so after that one time, after the first time to Laredo, I thought that this is wild. I mean, it was the most wild experience, but surely that's it, right? I don't know why I needed to go. I mean, I know why now. I saw and learned a
Sure.
lot. But since then, I stopped counting after like 30 different times, going down to, obviously a huge focus on the Texas border, everyone from the RGV sector up to in McAllen. Spent a lot of time in the Roma and La Jolla area, which is where I encountered most of the younger unaccompanied minors. A lot of time over there in the Del Rio sector, Eagle
Mhm.
Pass and Del Rio, and up there to El Paso a few times, and then spent a little time out there in Yuma, Arizona, just to compare and contrast what was happening outside of Texas.
Sure.
So it's been a very wild experience that I cannot doesn't make any sense whatsoever until I just started getting involved. It really is wild. And you learn things that you can never learn. People think that they see little videos, short little clips on social media or on the news. It's far worse and far different than any American can ever imagine.
Well, you talked a little bit about the unaccompanied minors. You said you didn't really see any in your very first trip, but it sounds like you have in your some of your other trips to the border. And I know you wrote an article, you have a Substack on unaccompanied minors that have come across our southern border into Texas, and the strain that that is putting on foster care facilities and the whole HHS, and I think is it ORR,
Mhm.
which we might need to clarify for our
Yeah.
audience all these acronyms here in a second, but I want to talk a little bit about that, and I want to start from your knowledge of what happens when a kid comes across a border, from there to how they end up in the system and how they get lost in the system. I know that's a loaded question.
So what's interesting is most of spending a lot of time in the RGV area in Roma and La Jolla in particular. That's where I encountered a lot of the unaccompanied minors. And that's actually what those experiences is what I was asked to go and testify in front of Congress
Okay.
for. Because what started happening now, you have unaccompanied minors that are coming over across all sectors, right? And really the RGV, which is the Rio Grande Valley sector, is where a lot of the younger children or just a large portion of unaccompanied minors and family units would typically cross. It's always been like this. Everything that we're talking about right now has been happening for years. This
Sure.
is not new under
Right.
this administration. It's happened under the Trump administration, Obama administration, so on and so forth. But it is what is new, of course, is the unprecedented amounts of people. And then they're just like completely throwing, the laws out.
Yeah.
Those don't matter at all,
Right.
which incentivizes it even more. And so when I started seeing by younger, I'm talking 10 years old, around that age group, young teens, and of course, older teens, and a lot of young females that were coming over in the RGB sector, which is different than even what you see in the Del Rio sector. Of course, there's been a change over the last more recent few years where even the younger children are really starting to come over in the Del Rio sector as well, which is, it's one of the things where I always question why. Why is that, right? But all that to say that as I was talking to these especially the young girls, because when they first come over, I mean, you could stand there on the banks of the Rio Grande in many of these areas, and you just watch them come over, especially in the RGV area. You've got the coyotes that are bringing them over on the rafts, especially in that area.
Now, when you say coyotes,
Mhm.
you mean like
Yeah, so those are your smugglers that are working for
okay.
the criminal cartel
Okay.
organization.
So that's the term for
Yeah,
okay.
are those individuals that are helping they're making money off of bringing people across the Rio Grande.
Okay.
And so they're bringing over these children, dropping them off essentially on, using these rafts and then dropping them off. And then Border Patrol will essentially apprehend them or encounter them.
Mhm.
It's kind of the same thing. And basically count them. And then from there, they will go typically to a processing center, which will be held for anywhere at 72 hours or under is their goal. Border Patrol wants to get them, out of their care as quickly as possible. And that's where a lot of the times the NGOs or the non-governmental organizations will take custody of these unaccompanied minors temporarily and then pass them off to sponsors most of the time from there. But to backtrack, as I'm speaking to these, young children coming over, I'm hearing, I always ask, I've always interviewed, and that's what I've written a lot about, is that I don't want to just focus on, it's not enough to just see it. What's driving them to come?
Yeah.
What's the driving at the actual, Kamala Harris says that the root causes.
Oh.
Kamala Harris always talks about the root causes that is causing these people to come from all over the world, right? What are those actual root causes is what I'm in search of. And so when I'm talking to a 10-year-old girl from Guatemala or Honduras, and she's telling me she came here as an unaccompanied child by herself, how does that happen? How does a 10-year-old girl come from Guatemala or Honduras and travels by herself thousands of miles across several different countries?
Right.
How does and end up on the banks in Roma or La Jolla, Texas?
Right.
How does that happen? Right. So asking those questions and where are you going? And so many of these kids had told me, just like so many of the adults had told me their experiences. These kids will tell me, several of them that I testified about, they were shoved into these bodegas or like these warehouses, essentially, or
Once they
going
get here or before
along the route.
oh, okay.
And because I'm like, how did you even afford to travel? Things of that nature, those types of questions.
One question though,
Mhm.
are they coming on their own will, or have they been kidnapped by the cartel, or is it mom and dad back home in Guatemala or whatever saying, I want a better life for my child? And I'm not a parent, so I can't imagine. I mean, if I had a child, I know I wouldn't want to just send my child off to across two or three different countries or wherever just to hope that they have a better life. So, and I'm sorry, I know I
No,
keep peeling back because I just want to
there's a lot.
understand
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
And that's the thing is that I don't ever want to assume
Yeah.
things. I don't like to assume, right? And so by having these frank conversations with these people who just recently crossed over, I watched crossed over illegally. I'm asking those exact type of questions.
Sure.
Now, there's several different types of scenarios, right? That I've been that we know that has been documented again by law enforcement officials and CBP, Customs and Border Patrol officials first. We know that there is such a thing as rented children. That's a thing. And that has always been a thing since the unaccompanied minors were really incentivized to come. There's also issues of call it like the separation of families. So, for example, I've seen where older teens will come over, and because as of right now, under this administration, if you're under a certain age, then you are basically guaranteed to be able to, or have a better chance of being able to stay into the country. Or if you're older and you're unaccompanied, right, then you have a better chance of being accepted into the country. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you might even have a family unit that comes together as they get closer and closer to the border, the cartel or the criminal smuggling organizations, or just by their own knowledge of information that they're getting feedback from others that have crossed illegally into the country, will say, we did this and this worked. So then they might mimic it. Where if there's a forced separation, meaning like, oh, I'm going to bring, I'm crossing over, I'm a family of four, and I'm crossing over with a toddler. But we also have the 16-year-old, our other 16-year-old daughter that's coming. We have a better chance of one of us being able to stay if she crosses over as unaccompanied and we cross over with our toddler. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there's several different situations. And I'm going to give you another example to kind of also answer another part of that is I had a woman who crossed over with her 2-year-old grandson, who she said was her 2-year-old grandson. And she had said that she was coming from Guatemala. She was raped along the way, gang raped along the way. Her and her grandson were shot at, by the cartel that were fighting and the criminal organizations, shoved into bodegas. I mean, no food, struggling to find food and water the entire trip. And the reason why she said that she was coming was for economic reasons, which, by the way, is not credible reasons for asylum, right? We know that. But she had said that her daughter had crossed over months earlier, who was the mother of her grandson, and at the time came over as an unaccompanied minor and was already settled in. Her daughter was raped along the way. Okay. And so similar situations, but she was able to come in. And so now she and her grandson are coming in, and she tells me about her experiences. And then she tells me one of the other questions that I've asked many that I've interviewed in Texas and Arizona is, would you do it again? Would you cross over again? And what would you say to other people who are thinking about coming the same route? Without a fail, every single female that I've ever talked to in male, but I obviously try to talk to females more. Absolutely not.
Wow.
I knew that it was going to be dangerous, but I had no idea it was going to be this bad.
Oh.
And every single time they will sit there and look at me and say, I would not do it again. And to tell other people, do not come. Yet, a few moments later, as we're continuing this conversation, she's telling me that she has her 14-year-old daughter still back at home in Guatemala. Because I asked her what her plan was. And the plan was to reunite with her daughter, her older daughter, and the mother of her grandson, and to save up enough money to then send for her 14-year-old daughter to come that's still living in Guatemala. And I looked at her because I am a mother, right? And in this whole conversation, my heart is just, and it makes me physically ill. And I look at her and I'm like, but wait a second. You just told me that you would not do this again. And you told other people not to come and don't bring their children. It's dangerous. And now you're telling me you have every intention of saving your money and sending for your 14-year-old daughter, who at the time, my daughter literally just turned 16 a few days ago. So at this time, my daughter was right there at the same age. You're telling me that you're going to send for her to take the same exact route, face the same exact abuse and rape and possible death. And she had no response. She just looked down. I can't tell you I can tell you what they say, but from a mother standpoint, I don't have the answers.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to, if you guys remember back at with the footage that was coming out after the debacle in Afghanistan, right? That the Biden administration just, it was heart-wrenching. And you see the mothers who are lifting their infants over the razor wire to hand them to our soldiers, right? Why? Because they knew what the Taliban were going to do to them.
Yeah.
This woman is saying for economic reasons and because the cost of inflation. We're dealing with inflation here.
Yeah.
And statistically speaking, these people and these unaccompanied minors that are coming over, it's not a good mixture for them. It's just not. And so I can't compare that with the women who are handing their babies.
Yeah.
If I was that Afghan woman, knowing what's literally right behind me,
Yeah.
would I do that? Probably. Would I hand them to an American? Would I hand my infant child over razor wire to hand them to complete strangers? I just might.
Yeah.
Right? But what the stories that they're telling me for economic reasons, I just don't see it.
Yeah.
I struggle.
And,
I struggle.
Heaven knows what else happened to them along the way. I can't even fathom putting a child through that.
And I think for me, the other thing that I've seen and that I felt, and that at the risk of sounding like a crazy person, that I felt like God has shown me through this is I'm not even necessarily mad at the illegal aliens crossing over, because some of what I've also learned from several of them is that they had claimed, and I have this all recorded, that even our own federal government is essentially advertising in Central and South America, saying on Telemundo and Univision, saying, come
on
now.
over.
And when you get here, these are the routes that you can take. There's even organizations out there that are giving swimming lessons to people intending to cross over illegally, so that they have a better chance of not drowning in the Rio Grande. We are helping to fund this and we are advertising it. So I'm not even, what I see is the exploitation of human beings. What I have seen in this is our own government funding the demise of the American people and preying off of and working with non-governmental organizations that are making ungodly amounts of money operating internationally, including in the UN is the biggest NGO that is helping to facilitate this. And then our policies drawing them here, and these NGOs operating in the United States that I believe are also helping to incentivize this. And who's winning? Because it's not the migrants themselves that are coming over.
No.
And it's surely not Texans.
Right.
It's not the ranchers whose lands are devastated. It's no one is winning from what I can see, except for the elites who are benefiting from this and these NGOs that are profiting from it.
So let's talk about those NGOs, because we talked about how when a minor comes across, or an unaccompanied child comes across our border, they are then released into the care of HHS, which I explained in the intro is a federal agency,
Health and
Human
Human Services.
Services, and they in turn place these unaccompanied minors into these NGO facilities. NGO, for those of you paying attention at home, it stands for non-government organizations. Just like you talk about in your Substack, how they're popping up without local governments being aware, and the dollars that are being funded. I want to share that with the audience.
Yeah, and kind of shift to, actually, I know you had asked about even like how it's streaming first foster care. So yeah, let's dive into that. So yes, you have HHS, Health and Human Services, which is on the federal level. And then you have ORR, which is the Office of Refugee Resettlement.
Okay.
That's because of the Florida Settlement Agreement and several different changes and policies that have changed over the years. And basically designated an agent. Y'all are going to take care of the children, right? There was really no rhyme or reason.
Wow.
Again, like looking at the policies and how all the different court cases, it's like, okay, they just decided that because there was a large number really since Obama that started coming over. Prior to that, unaccompanied minors had been coming over, but in such small numbers that Customs and Border Patrol or CBP didn't even necessarily track those encounters because they were so small.
Yeah.
And if you look at the facilities, they were not meant to house children, because that, even like under Obama, because there wasn't that many kids enough to justify building whole facilities for children, right? Anyways, so going through that, that's where after HHS and ORR started taking over the care of unaccompanied minors, if you will, or having the ability to quote unquote take custody of them. Then they started contracting with these non-governmental organizations. And that's where you see these large no-bid contracts that are coming into play, especially over the last few years. Happened under President Trump, happened under Obama, but just really exploded. And so Texas is actually, we have not only the most encounters of unaccompanied minors, which for obvious reasons, because we have the largest landmass of southwestern border, right? But then we are also the number one place where these unaccompanied minors, the number one state where unaccompanied minors are then released to sponsors, with over 50,000 in just the last 3 years. And I know we'll get into that a little later too. But also, we are also the number one state for these facilities that are housing unaccompanied minors, with well over 50 that we know of. And I say that because, yes, you had cases like in Midland, Texas. We wrote a whole research paper. People can go to our website, securetheborder.us, and click on research publication and see that whole research document that we put on there. I mean, I've talked about several different long-standing issues with these facilities all throughout the state of Texas. that we're housing these, that are continuing to house these unaccompanied minors, and the legislation that we put forth and that we worked on, and basically justifying the need for this legislation.
Yeah.
And again, like, that's the reason why it's so important, is because the federal government is still continuing to try to codify or make permanent these dangerous policies. They just tried it again with this failed the Senate bill in Congress,
Mhm.
and they just passed, a separate bill for funding
Yep.
because they couldn't get this border bill passed. In that border bill, once again, that failed. They were trying to essentially codify these dangerous policies. Well, that is so concerning, for especially for Texas, for so many reasons. Because by doing that, it would make it even easier for them to just not communicate, continue not communicating, not adhering to their own policies or state policies with regards to these facilities
Mhm.
that are housing children. And we have over 50, like I said, which is far more. I think California, I can't remember, it's in the teens, and they're number two. The Center Square, Bethany Blankley, she wrote a few different pieces about that
Mhm.
and about our legislation and about these facilities and the number of unaccompanied minors. The DFW area from Tarrant County, where I live, Denton County, and of course Dallas. Dallas is number two. Harris County is number one, where these unaccompanied minors are released to sponsors. Tarrant County, we're number four, and the surrounding areas combined, we're almost getting up to Harris County if you combine them all together. But yeah, this is a very real big issue, and these facilities are all across the state. This is not what I call this like an in between issue,
Mhm.
because it's not right along the physical border, and it's not directly related to criminal cartel organizations, although there are some overlapping concerns with that. And so, yeah, but it's in between that is impacting all of Texas because these facilities are everywhere.
So when an unaccompanied minor comes across, they can either be released to a sponsor, which could be an individual,
Mhm.
if I'm understanding that right, or these facilities, which a lot of times these facilities are d- owned or ran by these NGOs, these non-government organizations. Maybe talk a little bit about the problem with these facilities
Mhm.
and what you've seen in, well, the lack of transparency, I guess.
Yeah. So, yes, once they cross over, Border Patrol will apprehend them.
Mhm.
Sometimes, very not often, they will go directly to a sponsor. It's not often because they need time to be able to quote unquote vet these sponsors, who some of them claim are family members. But when you look at the actual stats of it, and even when I actually met with one of the NGOs that I also wrote about, they invited me to come and speak, a Texas based NGO that is housing them and also taking care of Texas foster care children. Even when I had met with them, a good portion of these individuals that are these quote unquote sponsors, they claim are also family members. But a lot of these sponsors are illegal aliens themselves. So they is no real way to truly vet these individuals.
Right.
And even when I met with Endeavors and I asked them specifically, like, how many of the children, the unaccompanied minors that are going through your Texas facilities are actually being released to family members or other illegal aliens, those who are not here in the country legally. And the response that I got was, oh, none of them. And I'm like, how is that possible?
Mhm.
Because statistically speaking, a good portion of them actually are going to other illegal aliens. So what are you doing differently than every other NGO? And there was no viable response to that. And then when it was brought to my attention that they are also contracting, they being these NGOs are also contracting with the state of Texas to help alleviate some of our issues within our own state foster care system. The next logical question is, how is that happening? Are they separating them in these facilities? Like, are there different facilities? What about the funding allocation?
Mhm.
Is this, I know that you guys are receiving no bid contracts or other contracts with HHS on the federal level. And then now you're also receiving state allocated funds for state foster care system. And how is that being separated? How can we as taxpayers know that our Texas foster care children are in fact being taken care of the way that our taxpayer dollars are supposed to be taking care of them. When a lot of, and if you look at the complexities even within our state foster care system, you see a lot of the same issues where the workers and the employees were not being vetted properly. They were not properly being background checked. And so what confidence do I have? And why are we as a state also contracting and giving millions of allocated funds to these same NGOs that on both the Office of the Inspector General and the Government of Office of the Accountability, which I quote in my paper, have shown the numerous ways where they had failed to even, again, adhere to even HHS and ORR guidelines. They failed to adhere to state regulated and guidelines. They failed to even something as simple as making sure that their children, that the people who are encountering their children, the volunteers and the workers, are properly background checked against sex offender registries. How am I supposed to be able to feel confident that these same groups and these same organizations are somehow that are failing on the federal level, these unaccompanied minors, are somehow doing anything different on the state level with foster care children?
Right.
It just doesn't scream confidence.
Right.
So,
And I think I read in your paper that there was a quote in there from HHS that within the first 30 days, whenever these children are placed in these facilities, they will do maybe some basic checks. But I think there's a quote that said something to the effect of, it is not the responsibility of HHS to ensure the safety of these children after 30 days.
correct.
So that tells me that these children that are being placed in these facilities or with sponsors, we have no idea
Mhm.
the conditions that they are exposed to. We have no idea what's going on in those facilities or those homes, or how many people are there. Am I understanding that
Mhm.
correctly?
Yes. So, and even when I met with the NGO with Endeavors, I will say that when I even ask, because I always try to, I'm never going to assume that people are doing things maliciously, right? I don't ever want to think the worst of people. And I think that they're honestly, in some ways, trying to do some good, but HHS and OR make it very difficult to do that sometimes. And so part of that is when I had asked them, if there are things that you would like to see changed because you genuinely care, according to them, you genuinely care for these unaccompanied minors, what would some of those things be? Right. And the response was, I thought, very, very good. And I agreed with them. Some of the things that they had was that the hotline, the HHS hotline, which I think we also mentioned in there, and it's been cited, gosh, so many times, even the New York Times reported on it, that the HHS hotline is not responding. When children call in or unaccompanied minors call in, they're given a number as they're going through the program, going through the
The
HHS
system.
custody.
Yeah.
Yes, the system. And in these NGOs, they are told, well, call this number if you have any problems. This is, how you can know if someone is taking advantage of you, if your sponsor's taking advantage of you, and call this number if you have any problems, right? And that's exactly what some of them have done, but HHS doesn't return those phone calls. And then what Endeavors had told me at the time, to their credit, they were like, we would like to, they're in our care for 30 days or however long, right? Until we vet the sponsors, which is questionable at best. It's just not effective, right? The systems that they're using. But until we vet the sponsors, but then yes, once they're out of our care and we release them to the sponsors, we cannot even, according to HHS, and this is again in their documents, they being HHS, we cannot follow up with them in person. So if I'm a child, right? Let's say I'm a teen, I don't speak the language. I don't even know who my sponsors are because, like so many of the ones that I've encountered, when I've asked them on the little pieces of paper, the phone numbers and addresses to their alleged sponsors, I'm like, so do you know who this person is? And so many of them, no, I've never met them. I'm told that the lady, at the bodegas or the ladies at these facilities told me that when I get to the United States, this is who I should ask for. And they said that this is my father or this is my uncle, but I've never met them. This is what they're telling me. So that's how this all kind of comes together between my personal experiences with encountering them and talking to them and then seeing what happens thereafter, they are not even able to, even though Endeavors, and I'm just using them as an example,
Sure.
even though Endeavors has taken care of this child for 30 days and has built at least a rapport, their staff has built a rapport with these children. They are then, if the child picks them up and says, picks up the phone and calls their caseworker and says, I need help, this is happening or that is happening, they are not able to follow up in person.
Mhm.
And then HHS has wiped their hands and said legally, after 30 days, we're not responsible. So that's exactly what is happening. And we've had whistleblowers, some of them Tara Rodas, who I testified with
Yes.
alongside, who was in the office of the Inspector General, the OIG, and saw what was happening in the in-between, right? So I'm seeing it on the front lines from these kids coming over telling me this. She's seeing it in her work, and seeing what's going on. And then we also had even like the Florida grand jury investigation over there in the state of Florida. They released 5 different findings, and many of the cases of verified trafficking cases where some of these children were even released to sponsors that just happened to be living at a strip club.
Oh.
Several of these cases actually came through NGO facilities here in Texas.
Which NGOs are funded.
Yes.
They're that's our tax dollars
The
that
HHS
are
contracted.
taking care of this.
Yes. And then when you see so much need, even here within our state foster care system, when people say that they really care about ending abuse and exploitation of children, most of the child trafficking cases and sex trafficking cases are actually from our state foster care children, right? That are going, like, a large majority of the percentages of trafficking cases and repeat trafficking cases. We have so much needs right here in the state of Texas.
Mm.
And yet the federal government and even our state on some levels is helping to aid even furthering the already horrific plague of child exploitation and exploitation in general, and sexual abuse and sexual exploitation, by pumping the already broken system even more. They're throwing more money at it, but not actually solving the problems. And that's where it's just, you just want to rip your hair out and go,
Right.
why is it? And this is happening right in our backyards and using our money. It's just, it's very disturbing.
What do you think we should do?
Mhm.
What do you think can be done? I know there's legislation. I can't remember SB.
Our bills have actually changed numbers a few times. It was HB 5000,
Okay.
and then it morphed into HB 167 and 168 during some of the special sessions. And then the last special session that we had was HB 97.
Okay.
And look, that bill with Representative Stan Kitzman, and we even had bipartisan support during the 3rd special session on both of them, because it's common sense.
Mhm.
It's literally common sense. I mean, like, if you look at it, it's taking the existing codes that we already have on the state, which are so small and so vague as it is, and just expanding it, which we have every legal right and authority and constitutional right and authority to be able to say, we can't stop you from operating here.
Yeah.
But if you're going to operate here, you need to at least adhere to our guidelines.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what it attempts to do. And some of the other issues that we started talking about, Midland, for example, and I'll just circle back to that here for just a brief moment. Like, what happened in Midland was that the federal government showed up quite literally in the middle of the night and with busloads of kids and to an old abandoned man camp. Absolutely not suitable for
No.
children, and violated several of HHS's own policies and guidelines. Didn't notify any local officials whatsoever. The DA was over there, I believe, in Washington, D.C. at the time. I'd had a podcast with her years ago about everything that they did, and that facility was shut down. They were successful because the sheriff and the DA and several others there locally were like, they just wouldn't stop. They kept on. And they kept on saying, you're not even adhering to our own codes, to these codes. like your fire codes, things like city, local, most basic things. And the sheriff's office had even offered to allow his services and his office to be able to vet some of the volunteers and the employees that were coming in there to work, to background check them like properly, right? And it was denied. So many different issues, but they were able to get that facility shut down because they kept on top of it.
Mhm.
Well, when we talk about some of the different regulations from general municipalities on
Yeah.
the local levels, which is a smaller under 10,000 population of 10,000 and under, compared to like, let's say Houston or Dallas, there's different things that different powers and authorities that those different types of local governments have, right? And so that's some of the some of the driving motivations behind some of this legislation, and even that from like Senator Colhurst that we supported adamantly, and it was Tim Lampum from Austin County that proposed that, and it was we were there in support, which tried to give the local authorities, like the general municipalities, more authority there, just to be able to force transparency.
Mhm.
And when you had Democrats and Republicans alike on the state level for both our legislation and for Senator Colhurst's legislation, and even our bipartisan supported letter that we had that was sent to the AG's office, which I'll close with that, I guess, asking, like, supporting this legislation and saying, wait a second, you mean to tell me that I forget which senator it was. It was a Democrat from the DFW area. It was like, you
Was it
mean
Royce?
Royce? Yes.
Yep.
And he said, you mean to tell me that y'all even just tried to get a copy of the contract from Congressman McCall all the way down to Senator Colhurst and Representative Stan Kitzman and Joan Huffman, just tried to get a copy of the contract, and this for-profit NGO and federal government refused to even do that? Yeah. It's just shocking. And so when you have the Democrats and Republicans across the spectrum all sitting there, when they realize, like, wait a second, what? And they're all going, yeah, this isn't good. This
Yeah.
isn't good for Texas. This isn't good for the kids. This
Right.
isn't good for the communities, especially in the rural areas. All kind of agreeing, you're over the target.
Right.
And especially with our legislation, I truly believe, again, we can't stop these facilities from happening legally and constitutionally, but if we're going to have them, at least put them also in an area where they're in a suburban or metroplex area where they can have more resources, more EMS, more law enforcement, where they have already the existing codes and regulations there, and the capacity to be able to make sure that everything's on the up and up. Because Houston was also able to shut down some of these facilities
Mhm.
because they had the capacity to be able to do it. And don't put even more of a strain on the rural communities, which is a huge target for several reasons for these facilities, because of the cost,
Mhm.
because it's easier to hide in plain sight, like in Midland, Texas,
Yeah.
right? Where they're able to just open it up thinking that nobody's going to pay attention. So that for several reasons, we've got to. So one of the things that people can do is pay attention.
Okay.
Pay attention. These types of things really, for example, in Wallace, Texas, which we talk about in the paper, which is where Tim Lampum wrote that legislation, SB 572. It was an old facility that was a state-run foster, essentially like a foster care type of facility, state-run facility, that was shut down because there were so many problems. A girl died, and after she died there, it's finally when it shut down. Well, that was a privately owned business, like building, if
Okay.
you will. And then Vision Quest, which is a for-profit that we also mentioned in that research
Mhm.
publication, that even liberals and conservatives like myself are sitting there going, this is really bad. Why is this NGO even allowed to operate in the state of Texas or anywhere in the country, right?
Right.
Because they've had so many problems, so many children die in their care, just so many issues. Literally opened up this facility from this private owner. When the city tried to pass an ordinance, and did, just simply saying, well, if there's other facilities that are trying to move in here, you at least have to be within the city limits.
Mhm.
And they were essentially laughed at. So I say that because become aware. They're going to
Okay.
target your old nursing homes, hospitals, anything that has some type of infrastructure there, become aware of what's popping up in your area. Pay attention to your city councils and stuff like that.
That's what I was going to
Mhm.
say. So if citizens want to be aware of this, this would be something that would come forth or would be on an
Should.
agenda at a city council meeting or a commissioner's court meeting, maybe.
Yes,
Okay.
should. And I say that, right? Because then you have different things, especially if you're looking at these types of facilities that are long-standing facilities. These
Okay.
are going to be smaller facilities. So, for example, like the one in Vision Quest is going to hold maybe, 100, right? You might have some that may even hold like an Eagle Lake has the capacity of, they're planning on holding about 60 to 80.
Hmm.
And then you have the really big ones like in Pecos and like in Midland, like they did. Those are not nearly as common. It's more of these smaller ones. And yes, they would typically try to apply for, for the licensing stuff. And so pay attention and just pay attention to what's going up places. Ask the questions because I think a lot of this too, for example, in the city of Eagle Lake, the city council prior to was all gun ho about it. They thought that it was going to bring more jobs there and everything else. But then it also brings up other concerns. Okay, great. That sounds great. But when when we're already down 14 teachers,
Mm.
right, in a small rural town,
Yeah.
when we're already down 14 teachers in our elementary school, and now we're going to lose even more to an NGO that's coming in here, how is that helping the actual community? They will do their own in-house
In-house
education.
educating.
But that's the
Okay.
thing is that then they take the very few qualified educators because they are able, a small ISD cannot compete
Right.
with what some of these
What they're
NGOs are
being,
paying.
what they're paying.
Same thing with
Right.
city officials, same thing with security. It causes a lot of concerns on different levels, particularly in the rural areas.
Yeah.
So I know that this area is booming. It's
Yeah.
growing at a rapid pace. That especially in the surrounding areas, that may be a target in the future, which could have potentially negative consequences. And then you're also asking, like, who also is then inside of these facilities,
Mhm.
right? Because that's the other concern. These unaccompanied minors, not all of them are innocent 10-year-old girls coming over from Guatemala. Some of these are also like the teenager who came through Brownsville, Texas, came through more than likely Texas facilities, and then went to a sponsor in Maryland who dropped him off at a at a place where he then broke into the young girl's, a 20-year-old girl's room and strangled her with a cord and then raped her. And that mother just testified also in front of Congress.
Hmm.
That person came over. He was a gang verified. All they had to do at one of these facilities was lift up his shirt. They actually did their vetting. Lift up his shirt and they would have seen his gang affiliated tattoos.
Oh, wow.
Came through Texas as an unaccompanied minor and then killed
So something
an
as
American.
simple as that could have been done to prevent.
It's and just like also there was a person who claimed that he was an unaccompanied minor, turned out to be in his 20s,
Mm.
and that was one of the cases over there in Florida. Went through the process here in Texas, went through the Texas facilities, and then was shipped and released to a vetted sponsor in Florida, and then he ends up brutally murdering his sponsor. He came through as an unaccompanied minor. We don't know who these people are.
No.
And so that's the other thing is, especially in the communities, what if an unaccompanied child is really like runs away from one of these facilities, HHS is actively trying to discourage its employees and their contractors from reaching out to law enforcement. So that's the other part of this concern is that if these facilities like in Eagle Lake, where it's a very rural community and they're already plagued with gangs and violence there in that area, and it's an elderly community around the facility. And that was one of the questions that the locals had asked to Endeavors is if one of the children gets out, what happens? We don't know who these kids are.
Hmm.
They are not obligated by HHS to contact law enforcement.
Wow. So they're just
And as a matter of
released.
fact, it actively says that they are actively discouraged. And the same thing out there in Midland. They're actively discouraged too because they cannot, that goes against, it's like the least restrictive setting possible.
Mhm.
That's the thought process behind these HHS contracted facilities. So for several reasons, these facilities are very concerning. And yes, become watchdogs in your own areas. It could be a situation like out there in Wallace, where it is somebody who owns a building that's been abandoned for a while, and HHS comes in and says, or one of these facilities, NGOs comes in and says, well, we want to operate, and run contract with you. Do you use this facility? You need to be aware, and you need to be aware of the potential. And then you need to be aware of how to be able to try to combat some of the possible negative consequences as a result of it.
So as conservatives, we're not for open borders. We're not. We see all of the issues that come with it, but these children, we don't agree that they are here. We don't agree with how they got here and why. But why do you think it's important for Christian conservatives to be involved in this process to ensure that they have safe care while they are here in our state, in our backyards, in our nation?
Right. I personally, if I could wave that magic wand, right? I do not believe that so long as our American foster care children are so at risk and there's so many needs and the system is so broken, we have no business trying to take care of the world's children when we can't even take care of our own.
Yeah.
That's just how I fully believe that. The
But what
problem
we
is,
do-
is that they are here.
Yeah.
And our federal government continues to incentivize it. And our policies, even on the local levels, in many ways, continue to incentivize it. So long as they're incentivized to come here, and so long as that money is flowing, we have a biblical and moral obligation to stand up for what is right.
Mhm.
We know the problems that it's causing. And again, it's not enough to just say, this is just horrible. You then have to do something about it. And I'm not responsible for the outcome. Everything that I've done has been most of it on my own dime. I haven't gotten paid. We were talking about that earlier,
Yep.
right? We don't get paid for what we do.
Right.
In fact, it's actually cost me a whole lot of money. And my husband works 2 jobs, right?
Wow.
I mean, like, I'm a homeschooling mom. We've got 1 kid in college.
Wow.
We don't have this. We have a very humble home
Yeah.
with 1 bathroom. Like,
Right.
we don't do this for any other reason except we believe it is the right thing to do.
Mhm.
And I'm not responsible. You're not responsible. Your viewers are not responsible for the outcome, but you are responsible to try. You have to try.
Yep.
And by trying, that might look different. That might mean that you might become an over-caffeinated mom on a mission, just like me, traveling all over and saying, hair on fire, like, this has to stop, right? And fighting for legislation. Or it could mean that you start paying a little bit more attention to the buildings around you. Could mean that you start paying a little bit more attention to what's happening in your city council or in your county commissioners. It could mean that you give me 5 minutes. I always tell people this: give me 5 minutes. And if you're in between work and you have a break, or you've got 5 minutes before you pick up the kids, right? And I put in an action alert and I'm like, hey, we've got this bill up there. I'm over here in Austin fighting, or we're over here, trying to get this. Give me 5 minutes and send an email, make a phone call.
Yep.
That could be your trying,
Right.
right? And that doesn't mean that the bill's going to get passed.
Right.
That doesn't mean that I wish that the federal government things would change, right? But even if it doesn't, we have to try. And when we see the needs, and again, I see it as the incentivizing policies. So while we're actively trying and fighting for things to hopefully, God willing, change on the federal level, we have to do everything that we can here on the local levels. That's what's going to impact you and these people in your communities the most. However, I will say this: everything that I've seen, I have to remind myself, because I can't tell you how many times I was coming back from the border, or coming back from DC, or coming back from Austin, and my humanness, it hurts.
Mm.
I know what's going on. I live it. I see it. I'm fighting for it. But then I remind myself that God is in control.
Amen.
And I see there's not a single person that is coming over that border. There is not a single bill that is passed or that has failed on the state level, on the congressional level. There's not a single child that is being, brought over and put into our communities, whether it be to a sponsor or whether it be through these facilities, that God hasn't allowed to happen.
Right.
I can't understand it. It's not for me to understand. I know that a lot of it is evil behind it, and I have to be able to combat it in any way that I humanly can. I'll I'll tell you this one last little example experience that I had because I think it's absolutely relevant. It was mid 2021, and I was standing on the banks of the Rio Grande, next to some DHS officials and some journalists, and there was
DHS, Department of
Homeland, yes,
Yeah.
yes, of Homeland Security. Yes, sorry, I know the acronym. Which right now is currently being run by Mayorkas, right?
Yep.
So they
We were
not
trying to
not
get rid of it.
necessarily the greatest agency right now, in my opinion.
Nope.
Not that some of the there's not great people in it, I'm sure,
Right.
but the higher ups. It's same with everything, right? Anyways, I was standing there in Del Rio, and this is even before the large Haitian, population that
Mhm.
came over, the Haitian invasion. But this was when Del Rio was still very active. I'm standing there, and there was groups after groups coming over, and it was probably about the third group in, and I was live at the time. I was live streaming, and you could hear the people coming over. The telltale signs that there's a big group that's about to cross. And I had just witnessed in the group before this very heavy set adult man who was being swept by the river. Like you could see the currents in the river like pulling up. I don't have sympathy. I have very little sympathy, right?
Yeah.
They know what they're doing. This is a
Yep.
grown adult, right? I have very little sympathy for anything like that, but I'm witnessing this happen. And then all of a sudden in this next group, I hear it's pitch dark. You can't see your hand in front of your face. And I hear what sounds to be a little child
Mm.
on the other side of the river getting ready to cross.
Mhm.
River was very high, obviously. And as started shining the light, DHS officials started shining the light, and you could see them over. And I looked like this kid couldn't have been more than 7
Mhm.
years old, being placed on. I don't know if that was his family member. I don't know. It could be a rented. I don't know it could be a rented child. I don't know what the situation is. He's on the back of this adult who's crossing over illegally, right? And this child is screaming, and I'm standing on the banks, and I have been there when so many people have drowned in that river.
Mm.
And I say this like as this is happening, what's going through my head is, God, please don't let this child fall in the river.
Mhm.
And I'm helpless. This child, like this 7-year-old child, 8-year-old child, he has no idea. He has no control over what's happening to him.
No.
Right. I start praying because I am a Christian, because I am a believer, because I am a mother. I start praying for the safety of the child. And on my live feed, I was called so many names.
Oh.
People said that I was for the illegal aliens.
Oh.
You're for them. I mean, just like, people saying you're a rhino, you're a stout. It's all the same name calling. It's the same type of deal thing. I'm simply praying for the safety
For a
of
human
this
being, of a
child
child.
who's innocent, has no control. How can you call yourself a Christian
Right.
and attack someone who's seeing this firsthand for simply praying? Now, do I believe that those people should probably be sent back? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But again, that child has no control over
Right.
what's happening. And so when you have become and you've allowed the political game to set into your heart and to put so much anger into your heart that you would look at a child and hope that that child drowns, you cannot simultaneously call yourself a Christian.
Right.
So I know people get mad, and I know that they're like, we don't want them here. I agree with you. Again, I told you my stance.
Yeah.
We have no right taking care of anybody's children right now if we
Right.
can't even take care of our own. Period. The end.
Right.
That's how I feel. But they're here. They're coming. And none of it is happening without God allowing it to happen. That's why I hope that answers your
Yeah.
question. And obviously, I get very passionate about it because at the
Rightfully
end of the
so.
day, if this flag was not here and if our country's flag was not here, I'd still be doing what I'm doing because it is the right, moral, and biblical thing to do.
Thank you very much. I just want to say thank you for your service and thank you for what you have done with Alliance for a Safe Texas. And because I didn't know a lot of this until a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, whenever things were getting so bad. And that's why I testified at commissioner's court, just even that 2 minutes, but just everything I've learned since then. It's a problem, but you're right. I mean, we as Christians, we've got to do our part to make sure these children we prevent, if we can, keep them from being involved in sex trafficking and all the violence and abuse. I mean, you're right. We cannot call ourselves Christians if we don't try to do our part to stop it.
Stop the madness. We've
Exactly.
got to try.
Right.
We've got to try. And you know what? We're all learning.
We
We
are.
are all learning, and we are all going. I'm learning something every single day. So thank you so much for having me out here.
Yeah. Thank you.
And you are yet another perfect example of doing exactly that. Right, like taking action in your own capacity, in your own ways, especially here on the local level. So thank you for all you're doing and setting the example as well of how just regular people like
Yeah.
me and you can just try to start making that positive impact. So thank
Man.
you.
Sheena, tell our audience how they can find you because we want them to look up Alliance for a Safe Texas, help support you, as you mentioned. I mean, folks, Sheena has gone to Washington, D.C. and testified there. She's, as she mentioned, she goes to the Capitol in Austin. There's costs involved, and she brings great content. She is a phenomenal writer. That's why I would love for you to tell our audience how to find you and be involved.
So thank you. Yes, securetheborder.us is our website, securetheborder.us. And on there as well, you can go to the merchandise store. And
Pick up
we
one of
just
these
had
great
this
shirts.
stand with Texas that Governor Abbott was that was one of the best compliments when he was
Yes.
like, "I love your shirt. You need to sell it." And I was like, "I won't." And we had it up the next morning. So that was great with everything that we're trying to do right here in the state of
Yes.
Texas to stand up against this tyrannical federal government, but 1,000 miles away.
Yeah.
So they can go and click on the merchandise store there, and they can also sign up for the Substack. We have a Substack, and especially I try to put as much information out there as possible. It's been pretty crazy and chaotic this last few weeks, especially with the primaries. I know everyone's pretty crazy right now. But especially during the session and with the interim hearings that'll be starting right after primaries happens, we'll definitely be posting updates and those crucial action items.
Yes.
That 5 minutes that I ask people to give me, when we're trying to advocate for strong border security or interior enforcement and for like these facilities and everything that we just talked about today, I'll usually put those action items right there on Substack. And yeah, so in that link will also be there. But everything can be found on our website, securetheborder.us. And check out the Substack, check out the research publication that we referenced to you in here. And yeah, I hope people will find it as a really good resource of information.
All right. Thank you so much for coming to
Thank you.
Waxahachie to visit with us, Sheena. We appreciate you.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks. I hope that this episode of Patriots Revival has really opened your eyes to the horrors of these unaccompanied minors and all that they're exposed to whenever they cross our southern border, our Texas southern border. I want to share with you some scripture because we as Christians, even though myself and others, we are not for open borders. We are against open borders. However, God calls us to make sure that these children receive the care that they need. These kids are exposed to, as I mentioned in the opening, they're exposed to violent crime. They're exposed to slave labor. They are exposed to sex trafficking and get caught up and are part of all of these things, these poor, innocent children. And some scripture I want to share with you today will start in Psalm 10, 4 through 18. It says, "The wicked are too proud to seek God. They seem to think that God is dead. Yet they succeed in everything they do. They do not see your punishment awaiting them. They sneer at all their enemies. They think, nothing bad will ever happen to us. We will be free of trouble forever. Their mouths are full of cursing, lies, and threats. Trouble and evil are on the tips of their tongues. They lurk in ambush in the villages, waiting to murder innocent people. They are always searching for helpless victims. Like lions crouched in hiding, they wait to pounce on the helpless. Like hunters, they capture the helpless and drag them away in nets. Their helpless victims are crushed. They fall beneath the strength of the wicked. The wicked think, God isn't watching us. He has closed his eyes and won't even see what we do. Arise, O Lord. Punish the wicked, O God. Do not ignore the helpless. Why do the wicked get away with despising God? They think God will never call us to account. But you see the trouble and grief that they cause. You take note of it and punish them. The helpless put their trust in you. You defend the orphans. Break the arms of these wicked, evil people. Go after them until the last one is destroyed. The Lord is king forever and ever. The godless nations will vanish from the land. Lord, you know the hopes of the helpless. Surely you will hear the cries and comfort them. You will bring justice to the orphans and the oppressed, so mere people can no longer terrify them. In Psalm 82, 3-4, give justice to the poor and the orphan. Uphold the rights of the oppressed and the destitute. Rescue the poor and helpless. Deliver them from the grasp of evil people. Folks, these are evil people that are doing this to these children that are coming across the border. Two more scriptures. James 1:27. Pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. In Deuteronomy 14:29, this is talking about tithing, but follow me here. It says, give it to all the Levites who will receive no allotment of land among you, as well to the foreigners living among you, the orphans and the widows in your town, so they can eat and be satisfied. Then the Lord your God will bless you in all your work. I know that you didn't ask for these orphans and these unaccompanied children to cross our border, nor did I. They are putting a strain on our resources, as we know, as Sheena talked about in her interview with us, a strain on local resources, on our schools, on healthcare, but they're here. And the Lord has called us to make sure that they receive the care that they need. So I'm not for open borders. If you're watching this, you're probably not for open borders because we know all of the problems that come with it. But these children are here and they are our responsibility to make sure that they are not exposed to harmful things like violent crime, sex trafficking, slave labor. It's happening. It's happening right underneath our noses. As we know, there are a plethora of issues that come from having people just come across our border, all across our nation, into our state. But what you need to know is a lot of these are not just people coming here for a better life. These are bad, violent criminals. These are children who have been taken from their families. And as I read in the scripture, God calls us to make sure that they are taken care of, to make sure that they are not exposed to these harmful dangers like violent crime, slave labor, sex trafficking. It is happening right here in our country, right here in our state. What can you do? This is this week's altar call. Get involved or get on the mailing list. Subscribe to Alliance for a Safe Texas. That is Sheena's organization. You can then be made aware of specific legislation or anything that has to do with this situation that may be heard at our Texas Capitol, important legislation that could be heard at the federal level. Sheena herself has gone to Washington, D.C. to testify. Just get on her email list so you can be made aware and donate. Donate, even if it's $5 or $10 to Alliance for a Safe Texas. So Sheena and her team can keep up the work that they are doing to inform citizens like you and me of this problem and all of the problems that we are facing at our southern border. That's all for this week's episode of Patriots Revival. Really appreciate you listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe on this platform. That is the only way we know that you are enjoying this podcast. And always, we end with our weekly scripture verse of Psalm 119:25, which says, "Revive me by your word." I hope that this revived your inner patriot to be involved. Until next time, thank you. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed the show, please follow us and tell others. If today's show revived your faith and your inner patriot, join the Patriots Revival Facebook group by going to facebook.com/groups/Patriots Revival for resources on how to get involved in being salt and light in a world of darkness. Are you local to the Ellis County, Texas area? If so, check out the Patriots Revival podcast, The Local Show, for info on local issues, candidates and elections, a calendar of events of conservative organizations in the area, and ways for you to get involved. Finally, if you would like to contribute to the production costs of the Patriots Revival podcast, you can do so through Zelle by inputting info@patriotsrevival.com as the recipient. Thanks again for listening. I hope you have a reviving week.